Hi, and welcome back. In the previous few videos, we have gone through many concepts of the PMBOK 5th edition, and we're now ready to look at the next knowledge area in detail, which is project scope management. Project scope management includes the processes required to ensure that the project includes all the work required and only the work required to complete the project successfully. Managing a project scope, it is in many ways a gatekeeping activity that defines and controls what is and is not included in the project. The project team should agree and be aware of the project scope before any work begins. Consider it like a binding agreement that everyone has signed before moving forward. As we will see later in this course, projects include both the work of the project and products needed for the project. Therefore, in the context of project scope, it is used for both project scope and product scope. Project scope management manages both. To fulfill its functions, project scope management includes 6 processes which can vary according to the nature of the project. The 6 processes include plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create WBS, validate scope, and control scope. Process. This process creates a plan for managing the scope of a project. The resulting document, which is the scope management plan, states how the project scope will be defined, validated, controlled, and verified. The key benefit of this planning process is that it provides guidance and direction on how scope will be managed throughout the project. The key inputs for the plan scope management process include project management plan, project charter, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. The tools and techniques for scope management include expert judgment and meetings to develop the scope management plan. The outputs produced in this process are the scope management plan and requirements management plan. Please note that the requirements management plan describes how requirements will be analyzed, documented, and managed throughout the project. This plan would tell us, for example, how we should prioritize project requirements. Both these outputs become inputs for the next process, collect requirements. We'll see how these work together in the next video. Hi, and welcome to our video on the collect requirements process of the project scope management knowledge area. The collect requirements process determines, documents, and manages stakeholder needs and requirements to meet project objectives. Each stakeholder in a project has needs he or she expects the project to meet. Requirements are those things that must be done in the project or products that must be provided by the project to meet those needs. The collect requirements process determines what those things and products are. For example, assume we are implementing a new telephone system in our company. The technical requirements for this product could include hardware, software, training, and an implementation plan. This process's inputs are the scope management plan, the requirements management plan, stakeholder management plan, project charter, and stakeholder register. Note here that one of the key inputs is the stakeholder register, as we need to know who the stakeholders are so we can meet with them and understand their requirements for the project. Let's look at the tools and techniques for the collect requirements process. An important tool is to interview important project stakeholders to identify and define the features or functions of the desired project deliverables. Similar to interviewing is conducting focus groups, in which a trained moderator guides the group through an interactive conversation that reveals, sometimes indirectly, important needs and requirements. Another group technique we use in this process is facilitated workshops. These define product requirements while reconciling stakeholder differences. Well-run sessions can increase stakeholder consensus, a plus for any project. Group creativity techniques such as brainstorming, idea and mind mapping, and creating affinity diagrams can also help to identify project and product requirements with project team members as well as stakeholders and outside experts. Group decision-making techniques take 4 major forms. Unanimity, in which everyone agrees on a single course of action. Majority, in which there is support from more than 50% of the members of the group. Plurality, in which the largest block of a group decides, even if a majority is not achieved. and dictatorship, in which one individual makes the decision for the group. Building or coming to a consensus is a variation of the unanimity form. Other tools and techniques in this process are questionnaires and surveys, observations, also called job shadowing, prototypes, benchmarking, context diagrams, and document analysis. The type of organization, nature of the project, and nature of the information needed will help determine which of these tools and techniques is most appropriate. The Collect Requirements process produces two major outputs, the requirements documentation and the requirements traceability matrix. The requirements documentation describes how each requirement meets a business need for the project. The requirements traceability matrix links each requirement to the deliverable or deliverables that satisfy it. This tracking provides a structure for managing changes to project and product scope. In order to manage the scope of our project, we need to define scope, and that is the next process in project scope management. By defining which requirements will be included in and excluded from the project scope, this process develops a detailed description of the project and product, service, or result derived from the requirements identified in the Collect Requirements process. Defined scope selects the final project requirements from the requirements documentation to develop a description because not all of the requirements identified will be included in the project. Ultimately, we will have a project scope statement that will provide a basis for future project decisions and will help create a common understanding among all the stakeholders. Defined scope uses the following inputs: the scope management plan, project charter, requirements documentation, and organizational process assets. Defined scope utilizes some or all of these tools and techniques: expert judgment, product analysis, alternatives identification, and facilitated workshops. And the process produces two key outputs: the project scope statement and project documentation updates. The project scope statement is a detailed description of the project scope, major deliverables, assumptions, and constraints. It enables project teams to do more detailed planning, guides the project team's work during execution, and provides a baseline for determining if requested changes and work are within the project scope. This baseline comes from the project's acceptance criteria stated in this document. Without this statement, project scope management does not happen. Without project scope management, the project is likely to wander, run over budget, and oftentimes fail. Now, let's go to the next process, which is create WBS. The WBS stands for Work Breakdown Structure. It is the process of breaking down work into smaller, more manageable units. For example, if we want to construct a 3-story building, the first level of decomposition would be the individual floors of the building. The second level would be the electrical plumbing for each floor. And the third level is where the electrical work is broken down further into laying of cables, switches, and electrical points. Since this is the lowest level of the WBS in this example, it is called the work package. That's right, the lowest level of the WBS is always called the work package. The PMBOK 5 defines a work breakdown structure as a hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of the work to be carried out by the project team to accomplish the project objectives and create the required deliverables. The WBS is a deliverable-oriented hierarchical decomposition of the work to be executed by the project team. The Create WBS process uses the following key inputs: the scope management plan, project scope statement, requirements documentation, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. From a project perspective, it makes sense that we would need these inputs in this process because we need to have a clear sense as to the scope of the project in order to begin developing the WBS, specifically needing the project scope statement and requirements documentation here. The key tools and techniques for Create WBS process are decomposition and expert judgment. Decomposition is a key word here that means breaking down. In this process, we are breaking down project deliverables with higher level components being decomposed first, and then the next level components are further decomposed until it is acceptable to stakeholders for planning, delivery, and control. We may need subject matter experts, in other words, expert judgment on the team to help us in this process. The Create WBS process produces the scope baseline and project document updates. Scope baseline is basically an approved scope statement, work breakdown structure, and its associated WBS dictionary. It can be changed only through formal change control procedures. Project documents that may be updated could include requirements documentation, which may need to be updated to include approved changes. As a result of the Create WBS process, we may have some approved change requests, so we will update the requirements documentation to include the approved changes. Hi, and welcome back to the Project Scope Management. The fifth of 6 processes in Project Scope Management is Validate Scope. This process formalizes acceptance of each completed project deliverable. Validating each deliverable greatly enhances the chances that the final product, service, or result will be accepted. Validate Scope includes the following key inputs: project management plan, requirements documentation, requirements traceability matrix, verified deliverables, and work performance data. The verified deliverables are those that have been completed and checked for correctness during the quality control process. While the quality control process is mainly concerned with a deliverable meeting the quality requirements specified for it, Validate Scope is concerned with the deliverables acceptance by the customer or sponsor. The key tools and techniques utilized in the Validate Scope process include inspection and group decision-making techniques. Inspection is used to determine whether the work and the deliverables meet the needs and the required product acceptance criteria. Inspections are also called reviews, audits, and walkthroughs. Group decision-making is a set of techniques used when the validation is performed by the project team and other stakeholders. This could be helpful when an inspection takes place to look at a completed product, and then the stakeholders conclude that it is acceptable because it meets the acceptance criteria established for the product. The 4 forms of group decision-making were listed in our previous video on the Collect Requirements process. The outputs of the Validate Scope process are accepted deliverables, change requests, work performance information, and project documentation updates. Again, deliverables that meet the acceptance criteria are formally signed off and approved by the customer or sponsor. If any changes need to be made to any deliverables that have not been formally accepted, you will need to document it, including the reasons why, and prepare a change request, which will then be reviewed and incorporated into the Perform Integrated Change Control process. Please also note that we want to continue to stay on top of project progress by collecting and providing work performance information, such as what deliverables are completed, what's still in progress, what's been finished, etc. This information can be included as part of project document updates. It's that simple and very important. The 6th and final process in project scope management is control scope. This refers to monitoring the status of the project and product scope, which helps in managing the changes to the scope baseline. It ensures to maintain the scope baseline throughout the project. Good scope control is critical to project management and requires you to balance the need to be flexible yet be rigid when it comes to adding things that are necessary. In other words, adding any bells and whistles. The key inputs are comprised of the project management plan, requirements documentation, requirements traceability matrix, work performance data, and organizational process assets. Working in conjunction with the Perform Integrated Change Control process, Control Scope uses these inputs to manage change to the project and minimize scope creep. For example, if you look at these inputs, you will see that we need to know what the requirements are and have the project management plan that includes the scope baseline so we can evaluate, determine the cause and degree of any variances, and then decide if any corrective or preventive actions is needed in order to control the scope. Obviously, variance analysis is the one key technique used in this process. This determines the cause and degree of difference between the baseline and actual performance. In the control scope process, decisions are made whether corrective or preventive action is required. The control scope process produces 5 outputs: work performance information, change requests, project management plan updates, project document updates, and organizational process assets updates. Essentially, we will have a lot of information gathered at this point as it relates to the work we have done in this project, including how the project scope is performing compared to the scope baseline. Sometimes changes are needed, so we will need to prepare a change request that can include preventive or corrective actions or enhancement requests. Again, processing through the Perform Integrated Change Control process. Please note that if the approved changes have an effect on the project scope, then the scope statement, the WBS, and WBS dictionary will need to be revised and reissued to reflect the approved changes. I hope you have enjoyed learning about project scope management, and I'll see you in the next video where we will begin our discussion of project time management. Thanks for watching.